Welcome to this edition of Soul of Warren County. I'm your host, Mickey Gwynn. My philosophy has always been, if at some point in your life you cross the Warren County line, you're a Warren Countian. And that's sort of the case with my guest today, even though he has spent a fair amount of time in Warren County as the transitional pastor at First Presbyterian Church. And today we're going to talk a little bit about religion, but also about why 15 September 1963 holds such a significant part of his memory. I'd like to welcome to the program today Reverend Warner Durnell. Reverend Durnell, welcome to Soul of Warren County.
Thank you. Good to be with you today.
We always like to start the program off with a little bit of a trip through down memory lane. Tell us a little bit about your life.
Well, thank you. I'm a native of Pennsylvania, actually. I was born and raised in a college town just north of the Mason-Dixon line in the southeast corner of Pennsylvania, about 20 miles west of Philadelphia. Westchester is my hometown. Like I said, a college town. My dad was born and raised there. I can go back at least 3-4 generations of Durnells who resided in that town. Family of one brother and 5 sisters, had 2 girl cousins living with us most of the time, so I always had to kind of watch the clothesline lest I strangle on pantyhose and bras. But my family, growing up, we were a church-going family. My father was Methodist. My mother had been born and raised Baptist, and so we kind of bounced around between the Methodist and Baptist churches on our side of the town. But we were quite ecumenical. I mean, we had relatives who were Roman Catholic, who went to the Holy Rollers Church, as we would call it then, the Pentecostal church. And every now and again, I would darken their door. So that was sort of the broad experience that I had growing up in my hometown. The school system, public school system, I attended and finished. We were about 10% black and brown in terms of the student body, but I had the honor of being elected student body president my senior year.
Congratulations.
And that kind of gave me a taste for the possibility of pursuing the political realm in life. But not exactly.
Not exactly.
Yeah.
You talk about going back generations. Have you been able to find a specific origin of your family as far as, I'm sure probably African natives at some point, but was there some sort of intermingling, if you will, of the races at some point in your family history?
I'm sure there was some intermingling. I have a younger sister who's the family genealogist.
Oh, okay. Okay.
She's able to trace our family line only as far back as just prior to the American Civil War.
Okay. Okay.
There was a William Arthur Durnell who resided in Murder Kill, Delaware. That's the name of the little community. He was married, had 3 sons and a daughter, enslaved. He was sold south sometime in the mid to late 1850s. His wife and children decided to leave Delaware, and they walked out. And they walked as far as the southeast corner of Pennsylvania, and that's where they lodged. He had been sold south.
Okay.
We know this because one of the boys, he was probably about 14 or 15 at the time, wrote on a piece of paper in charcoal, Pop sold south, Ma and us youngins walked out.
Wow.
That has been passed on from generation to generation. Now, the interesting thing, William Arthur Durnell came looking for his family after the emancipation, and he found them.
Oh, okay.
Because his oldest boy was named after him. And so with the 1860 census, he was able to locate his family, and they were reunited. That's about as far back as we can go.
Yeah. Sort of similar with my family. I was sort of doing the family tree and got back to a point, when you start to get close to the slave records in that time period of time, it starts to get really hard to track down the true origin and things, but it was interesting to go back. You mentioned in high school you were elected class president,
Yes.
even though the black-brown population was a small percentage at your high school. Why?
Well, I guess I was fairly popular. I had won a few contests. I was not a stellar athlete. Some would say I wasn't much of an athlete at all. But I kind of gave up sports in junior high.
Okay.
And began to really concentrate on my studies once I got to high school. But I was pretty active. Having grown up in the town, having gone through the school system, I was fairly widely known. But I do think we're talking about the late 60s, with all that was happening in the country. There was a desire, even an appetite among my classmates to elevate someone who might not have otherwise been given a chance. And I'm grateful to say I was able to prevail in that contest.
Just talking to you now, I can sort of imagine you being a pretty good orator even back at that time.
Well, that was one of the contests that I won.
Okay.
I won the boys speaking contest. I was on our debate team that went to the state championship. My wife actually was on that debate team. She was on the affirmative side. I was on the negative side, and they say opposites attract.
Right, right.
But yes, so I had some of those experiences that put me before the student body, and that's how it happened.
You mentioned about that experience in sort of giving you a little bit of a yearning for politics. You end up in the clergy. How did that happen?
Well, interesting.
Or is it similar?
Yes, right. Well, I left high school and enrolled in Lincoln University, which is a historically black college,
Right.
Also in the southeast corner of Pennsylvania. The first predominantly African-American college or university in the country, founded in 1856. I enrolled as a pre-law student. My ambitions, even from 7th grade, was to go into politics
Okay.
at some point, but certainly law. My first cousin, I'm kind of digressing, but my first cousin, one of my first cousins, was the first black police officer in my hometown.
Okay.
In the entire county, Chester County. So he was a law enforcer. I wanted to be a lawmaker because I felt even then that some of the laws were skewed in favor of people who already were privileged and in power. Mm-hmm. So I went off to college, political science major, looking forward to finishing school and going on to law school, but about my sophomore year, all that began to become murky. We're talking about now the early 70s. There was this movement across the country that has been labeled the Jesus movement. A motion picture recently came out with that same title. Well, it touched on my college campus, and so there were some of us who really became a bit zealous for the faith.
Okay.
We were known as the militants for Christ.
Okay.
We're talking about an era when Black Power was in vogue, et cetera.
Right.
So we saw ourselves as sort of being radical Christians. Well, folk began to come up to me and say, I think God might have something for you. You may have a call on your life. Now, I resisted. No, you got the wrong guy. I even tried to convince God that if God were wanting to recruit me, God was making a mistake. And so for about a year and a half, I really protested any notion of the possibility of pursuing a life in service to the church, I became ill. I was bedridden for a time.
Okay.
I mean, I was really fighting what I now know was a sense of call. But one January, I'll never forget, January afternoon, I just simply said, all right. I mean, I really wasn't happy about it, but I said, okay, I'll resign. If that's what you want from me, if that's how you would have me to live my life, okay. Within 20, certainly 30 minutes of that, I was up out of my bed. I had taken a shower, dressed. I was downstairs. My mother was shocked because I said, "I'm ready to eat. What you got?" There was something about just kind of pushing against what eventually I came to realize was a good thing for my life.
Right. Sure.
And so then I set my sights on preparation, going to seminary, and did.
You mentioned radical Christians.
Yes.
Somebody may look at those two terms and say they're polar opposite. How can you be a radical Christian? And I think it sort of relates a little bit to Dr. Martin Luther King's philosophy of peaceful protest. There was people who felt that being passive was not the way to go. I mean, there was conflict between himself and Malcolm X and the Black Panthers who wanted to be a more aggressive kind of thing. Did you see any kind of sort of a conflict with being a radical Christian?
No, as a matter of fact, at the time, and I still to this day believe that if we take our faith seriously as followers of Jesus, then there's something radical about it. There's something countercultural about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, ever since I was a boy, I knew that you could be Christian and not Christ-like. Even in my hometown, there were certain churches that frowned on people of color wanting to join.
Right.
And I said to myself, even as a boy, how can you be like Jesus, but at the same time discriminate on the basis of color? I had nothing to do with my complexion, my ethnicity, no more than you. Even to this day, there are some who say they are Christian, but find it easy to discriminate against people on the basis of their sexual orientation, or perhaps their nationality. And that, to me, as I read my Bible, as I seek to be prayerful, is not consistent with what it really means to be a follower of Christ. And so as a college student, we picked up on that.
Right.
And yes, there is the love of God, but there's also the justice of God. We're called to promote the love of Jesus, but we're also called to promote the justice of Jesus, not only in the church, but in the social arena where we are. And so that's what we were about. Now, we had more zeal than we had knowledge back then. But, I think it's easier to cool down something that's, hot than it is sometimes to, warm up something that's cold.
Right.
And so that's sort of how we view things.
And I wanted to touch on a couple of things that you mentioned. Sort of the church's role a little bit in social issues. And as I went out and did a little bit of research on the Presbyterian church and things of that nature, I was raised in the Church of Christ, which is a very conservative faith. Mm-hmm. I seem to find out that it seemed like the Presbyterian church is a lot more liberal maybe on social issues and things of that nature. And do you feel that the church should be at the forefront of social issues?
Certainly not in the background, I'll say that. I think you read the Presbyterian Church USA accurately. Right. We are considered probably to be a more liberal brand of Christian faith, at least in the context of American culture.
Right.
I was not born and raised Presbyterian. Methodism, yes. The Baptist church was close to where I lived. I married the daughter of a Baptist deacon.
Oh, wow.
There were Presbyterians in my hometown, and my fifth grade teacher, an African-American woman, was the daughter of a Presbyterian minister, so I had some knowledge of that. I was really introduced to Presbyterianism when I went to college because our college had been founded by Presbyterians. The chaplain was Presbyterian. And, but here's what drew me in. I learned that Presbyterians did not require you to check your head at the door when you came in. In other words, there was an invitation, even an encouragement to love God with your mind as well as with your heart. So that, knowledge of how this world actually operates, science, was not contrary to what it means to be a faithful believer. And it's okay to wrestle with issues that you're confronted with, using the scriptures as your guide.
Right.
And so that sort of drew me in. I also found Presbyterians willing to step out into the public square and wrestle with issues that impact the lives of people. I mean, I don't want to go on and start preaching, but if Jesus was concerned about the least and the lost, shouldn't we? And so I found the Presbyterian Church compatible with how I understood the faith.
I've read an article a number of times that basically is sort of titled 11 a.m. Sunday, the most segregated hour in America, talking about church.
Yes.
And the different denominations and how we've sort of segregated to in our churches, where you think if there was ever a place that we come together as different races, different ethnic groups, different demographics, it would be church. And it almost feels like, after I read that article, this was back in the mid-'60s, this article was penned, that it's almost like we've sort of accepted that as, well, that's just the way things going to be. It's not going to be any different. Even though I'm by no means, I say any particular denomination is saying, don't come in. If you're not a person of color, we don't want you here. It just seems like we've gotten to that norm to where if there was a time or a entity that we could come together, regardless of our ethnicity and things of that nature, it would be church. Do you have any comments on why we seem to be such a segregated religious country when it comes to things like that?
Very germane question, even for us today. I will let you know that, I have protested against the fact that we are so racially segregated in our church life here in America. It grieves me. I believe it grieves God that we are separated so often just on the basis of, the complexion of our sin, the complexion of our skin, and maybe also reflective of our sin as well. Certainly the sin of the past. Sure. The past has such a pull on us. There was a time when it was required for people to worship in separate sanctuaries. Sure. Or if you're in the same sanctuary, separated by maybe a balcony. I have actually been in churches, Presbyterian churches, in South Carolina and in Mississippi, where there was a balcony for the enslaved members of the community, and then afterwards the coloreds who wanted to continue to worship in those Sure. places. So that's part of our history, and that history still has a pull on us. Some would say, well, we're culturally different. Black folk prefer, a little livelier, sound in worship as opposed to a more placid sound among European Americans. But I think it's a little deeper than that. I have pastored predominantly African American congregations. And in each of those churches, I let it be known, we are open to anyone and everyone who wants to come. As a matter of fact, we're going to try to recruit some brothers and sisters of fair skin because we want to represent the kingdom. And I try to encourage my white brothers and sisters to be of like mind. Don't just settle on it being the way it is. Be active, even aggressive, in trying to make sure that it's open. And there are some ways in which that can be done. And if you ask me, I'll share with you a few of my suggestions at some point. But yeah, I think it still is the most segregated hour. But I see some changes taking place. The fact that I was at First Presbyterian Church in McMinnville,
Right.
being an African-American Presbyterian, pastoring a predominantly white congregation, says to me that those barriers that used to exist, I think they're crumbling.
I know there's a good friend of mine, Pastor Michael Harris, who is the pastor out at North Hills Church and Church of God of Prophecy.
Yes.
Pretty much predominantly white congregation. He's been the pastor there, I think, for 14, 15 years. So we see that. But also I just want to sort of caveat in that a little bit more too. Not only is Sunday at 11 one of the most segregated hours, but I feel over the years, despite what we went through the civil rights movement and all, we've become a lot more politically segregated over the last number of years. of years. And I don't want to get into all the politic kind of thing. I try to stay away from that. But do you see any correlation between the divisions we have now along political lines and maybe some of the divisions we have in churches and in our religious aspect of life? Do you see any correlation there at all?
Oh, absolutely. I think in part it's our bent toward tribalism. We like to be with folks who are most like us. However, though it may be contrary to the thinking of some, there is richness, there is wealth, there is much to be gained in diversity. We learn from each other. We appropriate the gifts of one for the whole when we are willing to, maybe reach outside of our circles of comfort. So right. I think there's that bit of tribalism. It pains me that we are in the political thicket of things such as we find ourselves. I do share with folks that I think one of the best things we can do is to try to find some folks who don't think like us, whose political posture is different, maybe even polar opposite of ours, and get to know them and listen to them. They've got their story. They have their reasons why they believe and what they believe in, and pull the levers when they vote for politicians who may reflect their worldview, their understanding of how this country of ours should be governed. Find out what's behind their thinking, and first of all, listen, and then you may be given the opportunity to share from yours. I have even members of my family. I have a sister who supports the former president. And boy, she and her husband, I go visit them, I listen to them, you know.
Right.
I said, I asked them, is there anything I can say that would change your mind? No. I said, okay, well, I'll just stay quiet.
Only had to tell me once.
yeah, I'll just stay quiet. But but I'm listening and I'm learning, and I might ask a question. Do you really believe that? But that's where we are, and God help us. And I pray that somehow, we'll be willing to get together, on the local level. I'm sure you've had the experience of going and visiting other churches and finding out, we have more in common than what divides us.
Sure.
Same thing politically, if we take the time to get to know one another.
Right, I agree. And I think just sort of, sort of going on some of the things that you said, I think some of the reasons may also be that we don't have that communication. We don't go out and talk, and we sort of shelter ourselves under our own beliefs, our own philosophies on things, and we don't see the other side to talk about it. Not saying that you're going to change your sister's
Right.
thoughts and things
Right.
of that nature, but to have that dialogue and talk about why do you feel that way, and listen to those. I think you're always going to want to have a counterpoint. Well, you believe that, but let me tell you why you're wrong.
Yeah.
But I think it's also good to be able just to listen. And I don't think we do that a lot these days, that we just sit down and listen on why someone thinks that way. We get sort of caught up in the rhetoric sometimes. We get caught up, as I used to tell a friend of mine that was a barber, and I'd go into the barber shop. You know how the barber shops are. They got stories going on. And I used to tell them all the time, I said, just because you talk louder than everybody else doesn't mean you're right. And that was sort of his thing. I talk louder than you, then I get my point across. I said, that don't mean you're right. Sometimes I think we just need to sit down and talk.
Right.
And I think that would make things a lot better. And I think we've gotten away from that idea of agree to disagree. It seemed like that philosophy has started to go out the door somewhat. But coming to McMinnville, I don't know how that process works, but you talked about being at predominantly black Presbyterian churches. You're asked to come to McMinnville, and I'm sure you felt that was part of your duties to do. Did you change at all because you're now at First Presbyterian Church in McMinnville, Tennessee? That's a predominantly white congregation. Did that change any of your the way you preached or anything of that nature?
You might have to ask my wife or children if they noticed any change. I tried to pretty much be myself.
Consistent, yeah.
But I'm also respective of the spirit of a house. In other words, if I come to visit you, I'm going to respect, the way in which things are done in the Gwynn home. And I would want that if you came to my home. So when I go to someone's house that may be a little different or worship a little different from the way in which I do, I try to be respectful. But at the same time, I want to be who I am authentically.
Right.
First, McMinnville was not the first predominantly white congregation that I had the opportunity to pastor over the years or to serve in some significant way. So it wasn't really a new venue to that extent. There were a couple of times I can remember kind of maybe reining myself in, when it came to preaching, because I said, I don't want to make folks, but I found that some of those moments were the ones that they remembered and cherished the most. No, you didn't have to stop. You didn't have to quiet down. I liked what you were saying.
Right.
Yeah. So now, fine folks, they had a pastor who needed to transition on. The elders found me over in Tullahoma. I was serving the Presbyterian church in downtown Tullahoma. When you finish this stint, could you come help us out? I prayed about it, and it's a curious thing about inviting God in on a decision, because God will sometimes give you that nudge or give you the green light. Sometimes it's a red light, but everything was green, and I came over, and I'm glad that I did. I'll tell you this, the fact that the Warren County African American History Museum is located in their facilities was one factor that I weighed in making my decision. I said, if they're willing to house that museum in their facilities, then that says a lot about who they are. So I said, I'm going to give them a shot.
Well, I will say that two of our board members, Rachel Killebrew and Mary Mason, said, Mickey, you have to get him on your show. And I remember the first email I sent to you and was asking if you'd be willing to come on. You said, you want me to do what? But they just raved about you, so I know they really enjoyed you being there. But I think so. I think maybe in little ways you sort of not cater, but maybe adjust your presentation maybe to the audience. Everybody does it. You talk to any public speaker, they'll tell you have to cater your presentation to your audience. But I think you go back to that one point with everything. you're not going to change and be a whole different person everywhere you
Right.
go. You got to
Right.
stay committed to yourself and things of that nature. And they were just raving about the time that you were there.
Well, let me say this before you go on to your next
Right.
question. Now, my oldest daughter, who when she was younger, just loved shadowing me whenever I was invited somewhere. She said, "Dad, you preach different when you go to the Baptist church." I said, "I do?" She said, "You do." I said, "Probably because I get more help." You know, in some churches you get more help,
Right.
you know, and they encourage you. And yeah.
Yeah, and I mentioned the Black History Museum, and that's sort of how we first met. You know,
Yes.
I'm the director of the Black History Museum, and they offered their facility when we first was looking for a location. You know, they're very inviting from day one, and I really appreciate that. I wanted to sort of transition into a little bit talking about your experiences, and talked about the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. But I also want to go back. You talk about I was raised right at the Mason-Dixon line kind of thing. Looking back, and I know that was sort of during that part of the civil rights movement, can you look back and say, yes, I remember these incidents of discrimination, where I was discriminated against because of the color of my skin or that nature? Or did you get more of your feel for the civil rights movements and things of that nature through the media, through TV and watching programs of that nature? Or did you have some experience that you said, yeah, I went through this. I had this discriminatory experience during my upbringing back in Pennsylvania?
Well, I can tell you, there's down south and there's up north.
Right.
And there's, unfortunately, there's discrimination along racial lines that existed, may not have been codified, may not have been legal, but certainly were practiced even during my boyhood. Let me just share with you a couple of experiences that I had as a youngster. I can remember watching television, and it was the Sally Star show. She was kind of like a girl cowboy who had children on her show. It was in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. And I'm sitting there watching it. You know, there'd be cartoons interdispersed, between her programming. Mm-hmm. There were no kids of color, not one. And I had a moment when I said, I wish I were white so I could go on the Sally Star show. But no sooner had I said it that I felt this sinking feeling. Oh, there's something wrong with that thought. Yeah. I mean, as a 6-year-old,
right.
You know, to want to be something other than you are, so you could be, but no kids of color were ever on that show. When my first grade in school, it was the first year of racial desegregation of the public schools in my hometown, from kindergarten through 12th. When my father grew up there, if you made it to 9th grade, that was an integrated high school. But K through 8th, segregated racially. So the year before I started first grade, the public school that was for colored children was demolished. I'm talking about razed, demolished, and a new school was built on that site because the old school, though it was good enough for colored kids, it wasn't good enough for white kids. I mean, I'm just going into first grade and I'm recognizing, wow, this is new school, huh? Okay. I was on a Little League baseball team, and the Little League park was outside of town, maybe about 2 miles walk. And I had permission to go, and the teams were made up of the kids in the community, so it was black and white and brown and yellow. And but I can remember walking home one day by myself, and this little girl came out of her home and called me the N-word.
Oh, wow.
Just as loud as she could. And it pained me. And I said, why don't you, shut up? I mean, I'm a 11-year-old, I guess. Her father comes out. I'm thinking he's going to correct her, and he supports her. So I had those kind of experiences that let me know that, There are some who still see color before they see anything,
Right.
before anything else. But those were rare experiences in my childhood. I could ride my bike most anywhere in town and felt safe, partly because of my last name.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, my cousin was the lone black police officer.
Yeah.
And folks knew my dad because he was the second colored mail carrier, is how he was referred to.
Right.
But yeah, no, there was some of that. But I also, could see what was going on elsewhere. Let me say this, if I'm not going on too long here.
Oh, no problem.
The bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham was a formative experience in my life. Okay, it was a Sunday morning, and I'm in church with my family. We're all in the Durnell pew, and the telephone is ringing in the pastor's study, which is adjacent to the pulpit area. And that was strange. Everybody in town knew what time it was on a Sunday morning. We're in church. You didn't call it church,
Right.
But it kept ringing, kept ringing. An assistant pastor left the pulpit, went to the pastor's study to answer the phone. A couple of minutes later, he comes back. He interrupts the pastor who's in mid-sermon. I'll never forget it. He whispers in his ear, this look of horror, actually, came upon the pastor's face. We soon found out why. He said, brothers and sisters, I have some sad news to share with you, something to that effect. There's been a bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and 4 little girls who had gone to Sunday school were killed in the blast. I mean, there was shock and there was, sorrow voiced aloud. And I thought of my sisters, 5 sisters, 4 of whom were seated next to me. One was being held by my mother, and I said, that could have been my sisters, because we go to Sunday school.
Right.
And the pastor quieted everyone. He said, let's pray. And while he's praying, this one thought came to my mind. We are better than that. We are better than that. We human beings. Mm-hmm. I mean, such a cowardly act of, stacking dynamite under a stairwell at a church and allowing it to detonate that kills children in Sunday school. I mean, you hate people of color just that much? Yes, 16th Street Baptist Church was the hub of the Birmingham Civil Rights Movement. We knew that, but to stoop so low as to do that, I said, we are better than that. And I made a little vow within myself as a 12-year-old that, when I get grown, I'm going south to make a difference, to keep that from happening again. So it was very formative, and I guess my animation lets you know that it's still very much near and dear to me. Yeah. I visited the 16th Street Baptist Church when I was serving a congregation in Alabama, in Tuscaloosa. I was given a tour along with a few other visitors there that day. The Sunday school superintendent that was the superintendent in 1963 was present, and she retold the story. Wow. As most of us know today, there was a 5th girl who was seriously injured in that blast. It was clinging to life, who did survive it. But, it was such a horrible. I tell you what, I think it helped to galvanize this country. We had just witnessed the March on Washington. Right. Its 60th anniversary is this year, as is the bombing's anniversary. My mom and dad, I can remember the morning they boarded the buses from my hometown to go to Washington, D.C.
Wow.
I was watching on television, straining as a youngster, trying to see if I could find them. Never did, of course. Not in that mass of people.
Right.
I can remember Dr. King's message, I have a dream, and how it just, stirred up in me, welled up in my heart as a youngster. Yeah, that's the kind of vision for this country. And but the bombing really just made a huge difference in my life.
Do you think it made a significant impact because it was at a church and there were young girls who were killed? What if they had planted the bombs at a juke joint down in Birmingham kind of thing, and some older people were killed or whatever? Do you think, and I think it was done that way for a purpose. I mean, because the churches was the hub of the civil rights movement.
Right.
So I'm certain it was done for a purpose, for an attention getter, to let people know, that sort of, this is what you're going to get if you continue this same process.
Yeah.
But do you think it had a greater impact because it was a church and you were in church? You were in this place
Right.
where you felt safe and you were hearing someone talk about the goodness of people,
Right.
and you find out that someone has bombed a church.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think the fact that it was a church, for all the reasons you've enumerated, as opposed to some other venue. I mean, it could have been a school. Maybe if I had been in school when I heard it, and it had been at a school, I might have felt similar. But the fact that it was a church, a place where people come for sanctuary, and that became the target. I mean, you could have set the bomb at a time when no one's at the church.
Sure.
But no, you're going to do it on a Sunday morning for a fact? Well, I just thought it was so horrific, so dehumanizing. I dare say demonic, given my perspective on some things, that it was crushing, and that it made that kind of impact. But I will say this: I had classmates when I went to school the next day who were equally horrified. I mean, I'm talking about white boys and girls who were equally horrified. And I think there were some who got off the fence and said, if that's what segregation produces, we want nothing to do with that. We will not lend our support to that. Yeah.
My first supervisor, matter of fact, I worked at a grocery store that was just right across the street back, I guess around 73, 74. He was a Church of Christ preacher, white Church of Christ preacher. And we've talked quite a bit over the years, and he always tells me that looking back, he felt probably one of the worst aspects of the civil rights movement and things like the bombing and other atrocities that went on was the fact that a lot of Southern white churches never stood up and said, this is wrong.
Yeah.
You may have your philosophy about the Confederacy and things of that nature. This is wrong. We're going to come out in support of the civil rights movement. We're going to do whatever we can to welcome you into our church if you want to hold a meeting with the NAACP, whatever it may be. And he says, I always think back about that, and he said, I feel ashamed as a Church of Christ preacher, even though he wasn't, down south. He has had a reputation of hiring some of the first African American young boys. See, my brother worked there, and all my brothers worked there. I worked there. My younger brother worked there. Okay. He said, looking back, he said, I feel embarrassed that the churches didn't stand up, the white churches didn't stand up in unity and say, look, this is wrong, because they knew it was wrong. He said, they knew it was wrong, and how do you come to grips with that? And I said, well, I think that sometimes when we have that conflict between our religious beliefs and sometimes our maybe political or societal beliefs, and it sort of goes back to what we talked about earlier. When I asked you about the Presbyterian church being very active in social issues, I think maybe some of the other churches, especially during that time, just for whatever reason, felt that wasn't their place. We don't get involved in that stuff. That's for other folks to do, or the black churches to do. But I will always remember those conversations. That why didn't the white churches come out and say, this is wrong? We're going to get behind the movement. And maybe it wouldn't have had taken so long for some of the legislation to pass and things of that nature. Maybe it would have went a long way in healing some of that divide if the churches had to come out and been more active during that time. So It was interesting that you said that about the churches and the involvement in social issues and things of that nature. And there was sort of a concept I know hearing my mom and father talk about, I was younger, about, well, we just need to wait till all the old folks die off. We'll be okay. The young kids are more into unity and things of that nature. And it seems like we're almost seeing the opposite. Some of those young folks back during that time have now become the elder statesmen, and we're in this situation we're in now. So I guess that philosophy obviously hasn't all held true, that once the old folks died off, our country would be okay. I'm sort of rambling myself now. But
well, we live in a broken world. At least that's our theological perspective as Christians. We're sinners. To a certain extent, we're all held captive to our sense of self-preservation and maybe even advancing the cause of our community. Mm-hmm. But that's why I think if we really take seriously what the scriptures teach and make the love ethic the number one standard for, reviewing, dare I say, judging all of what we are about, we'll have to land in a different place, a place that's a little more welcoming, a little more harmonious, a little more forgiving. And I guess that's really what helped to spur me into seeing ministry as a place where I could make a difference. And hopefully over the years I have. Yeah.
Do you ever feel that you would like to do more? Or do you ever feel some frustration in, I'm sort of out here by myself trying to make a difference? I know you talked about earlier when you were younger about going down and I want to make the laws, and you want to go down and take care of those issues that happened after the bombing and things of that nature. Do you get some sense of, am I doing all that I can do?
Oh, that question can, I guess, is always there in the background. Sometimes it moves to the forefront.
Right.
Let me share with you one conversation that I had when I was in Huntsville, Alabama, North Alabama. Sure. I was the regional executive for our denomination, kind of like a district superintendent maybe for some other church denomination. Not quite a bishop. We don't believe in, Presbyterians don't believe in giving that much power to one person, given our sinful nature. But I was having coffee with a pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Florence, sizable community, mm-hmm. University of, I think, North Alabama. Mm-hmm. Is right there. And I said to him, sometimes I think maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I should have stayed with the pastorate rather than coming to this position. I get to, pull some of the levers. I interact with congregations and pastors, but I wonder if I'm making even, a hint of difference. He said, "Are you crazy?" That's what he said to me. He said, "Are you crazy? Why are you even asking that question?" He looked at me straight-faced and said, "Every time you walk into a church setting, you make a difference. Mm-hmm. Because you're the first person of color in a position of authority that have darkened many of our church doors." Well, I got to thinking about it, and I said, I guess you're right about that. I had been to another church on a Sunday morning leading worship, and one of the elders, longtime member of that church, born and raised in the church, said to me, "You have any idea when the first African-American minister, graced our pulpit?" I said, "No, I'm thinking maybe back during, civil rights movement, or maybe afterwards." He said, "Today."
Wow.
That was 2006. He said, "Today." And the church was over 100 years old. Mm. So I like to believe that by the grace of God, The mere fact that I've tried to be a faithful witness has given me opportunities to enter into some arenas, not beating a drum, not waving a banner, just being myself. Has made a difference. And the fact that it has been in Alabama, it has been in Georgia, it has been in North Carolina, and is to this day in Tennessee, is witness to the fact that I have been trying to live a life that 12-year-old Warner sitting in that pew on that Sunday morning of September 16th, 1963, had purpose to do. Yeah, even coming to McMinnville.
Yeah, and I can understand. I could understand that. I think just from talking to you today, you've taken on that mantle of trying to go out and make a difference and make those inroads. So hopefully, maybe those that come on after you can continue to do that. It's just good to be able to hear about those stories and your efforts to do that, because I'm sure there's probably times where you do maybe sit back and say, hey, am I making a difference? And having someone to confirm that in a conversation, I'm sure went a long way in making you feel like indeed that you are making a difference.
Yeah.
And I think you are too. And I thank you for coming on the program.
Well, thank you. Can I share one last thing before you dismiss me?
Go right ahead.
I was paid a high compliment by a elder of First Presbyterian Church, McMinnville, just before leaving. She was saddened to see me go, but knew that I needed to move on. And she said, I didn't see you as a black minister. I saw you as my minister. And I believe her. I have no reason not to. And I mean, I hope we're nearing the day where it really doesn't matter, your complexion or your ethnicity, your nationality, that we recognize that we're all human beings, and we're all trying to do the best we can with what we've been given. And let's try to pull more in the same direction than against one another, and I think we'll have a better world.
And that brings to mind a story that I had. Speaking with a lady, she's over one of the historically black high schools. You may have heard of the Rosenwald schools.
Yes.
That program.
Yes, I have.
In the city, I won't name the city. I just don't want to put her out there. But was talking to her about what we were doing here in McMinnville with our museum, and talking about our diversity on our board of directors. And she was a African American lady. And I mentioned, I said, the president of our board of directors for our Black History Museum is a white lady. And she looked at me and she said, oh, we would never do that. And I was, taken a little bit aback, because I think it's not a one-way street.
Yeah,
we
right.
all have to be able to give a little and sort of, come to that understanding of if it's working, if it's making us better, who cares about the color of the skin?
Yeah,
You were their preacher. You were not a black preacher,
Yes.
And I think we all have to do that. I don't want to make it seem like it's a one-sided affair. We all have to do that. But when she said, oh, we would never do that, I'm like, I don't think that's the attitude to have. I think we've got to realize it's what's going to be best for us to move forward, to tell our story.
Right.
And if that person is, black, white, red, green, or whatever color they make, who cares? But I think we all have to do that. So, but like I said, I appreciate you coming in to doing
Thank
the
you
show.
for having me.
You have an open invitation to come back. I want to continue this conversation. So if you can find it in your schedule at some point down the road, I'd like to have you come back to talk some more. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, ditto. Thank you so much, my brother.
My pleasure. And thank you for joining us today. Please join us for the next edition. And until then, make today and every day a great day.